The alien forest of Kepler 442b stretched out in every direction like a purple sea of strange plants and twisted trees. The twin suns filtered through the thick canopy above, creating patterns of orange and red light that danced across the forest. Floor Delta Squadron moved through the dense undergrowth as quietly as they could manage, but their different body types made stealth difficult. Vex took the lead position using his natural camouflage abilities to blend in with the surroundings. His blue scales shifted to match the purple and green colors of the alien plants, while his 3 yellow eyes scanned constantly for any sign of danger. Behind him, Captain Rock used his massive strength to push aside fallen logs and thick branches. That blocked their path. The other squad members followed in formation, with each alien using their natural abilities to help the group move forward. Zix the Ethereal floated silently above the ground, passing through small obstacles while Hex used his 4 arms to climb over rocks and fallen trees that the others had to walk around. Their different skills made them work well as a team, even if they did not always get along. Hana brought up the rear as usual, carrying extra ammunition and medical supplies in her pack. The other soldiers had decided she should stay in the back where she would be safest, but she knew they really just did not want her getting in their way during a fight. Her rifle felt heavy in her hands, and every strange sound from the forest made her jump. The alien wildlife was unlike anything from Earth's strange bird, like creatures with too many wings called to each other from the treetops, while small animals that looked like purple rabbits ran between the trees. Something that sounded like a mix between a wolf and a machine howled in the distance, making all the squad members grip their weapons tighter. "We have been walking for 3 hours." Hex clicked through his mandibles in the insect language that the translators converted to galactic standard. "How much further do we need to go before we find this hunter? The terrain is slowing us down and we are leaving too many tracks." Captain Rock stopped the group and consulted his tactical scanner. The device showed their position on a 3-dimensional map of the forest, along with potential hiding spots and ambush points. According to command, the hunter ship was detected in this general area, but the exact location keeps changing. Its stealth systems are better than anything we have seen before. Vex suddenly raised his hand to signal for silence. His scales shifted to a dark red color, which meant danger, and his 3 eyes focused on something beyond normal perception. "Movement ahead," he whispered through. Their comm system large, approximately 3 meters tall, moving with predatory patterns. "Everyone get down now." The squad immediately dropped into combat positions behind trees and rocks with weapons ready and safeties off. Hana crouched behind a fallen log that smelled like rotting fruit and tried to control her breathing, but her heart was pounding so loud she was sure everyone could hear it. Through the purple trees came something that looked like it had crawled out of a nightmare. Keth. Var the Render stood nearly 4 meters tall with midnight black armor that seemed to absorb light from around it. His multiple red eyes glowed like burning coals as they swept the area looking for targets. Multiple weapon systems were built into his arms and shoulders, while trophy skulls from different species hung from his belt like gruesome decorations. The void. Hunter moved with fluid grace that seemed impossible for something so large. Each step was perfectly placed to make no sound, while his head turned constantly to scan for threats. His armor was covered in scars and blast marks that told the story of hundreds of battles across the galaxy. Well, the creature spoke in perfect galactic standard, though his voice was electronically enhanced to carry across great distances. "What do we have here? A mixed group of prey species? How interesting." His multiple eyes cataloged each squad member like he was reading a shopping list. Captain Rock stood up slowly, keeping his rifle pointed at the massive predator but not firing. "Yet I am Captain Rock of the Galactic Alliance Military. By the authority of civilized space, I order you to withdraw from this system immediately and cease all hostile activities." His voice carried the confidence of someone used to being obeyed. The Void Hunter's laughter sounded like metal grinding against stone authority civilized space. How amusing these concepts are. The only authority I recognize is strength, and the only civilization I respect is the one that can stop me from taking what I want. He began to circle around their position like a predator, evaluating wounded prey vex, kept his rifle trained on the massive creature, but his scales were shifting through different colors, showing his confusion and fear. "This is Keth Var the Render," he whispered to the others. "The stories say he has never been defeated in single combat, and that he can kill a dozen soldiers before they can even raise their weapons. You will provide adequate entertainment." Before joining my collection, the Void Hunter continued as he studied each squad member in turn. "Your fear tastes sweet in the air, especially from the small ones, hiding in the back." His red eyes seemed to look right through the log where Hana was, crouched. The standoff continued for several long seconds, with both sides waiting to see who would make the first move. Captain Rock was calculating the best angle of attack while Vex tried to find a clear shot that would not hit his own squad mates. Hex was ready to charge with his natural armor, while Zix prepared to phase through the hunter's attacks. Then something unexpected happened. Keth Var the Render's multiple eyes suddenly focused on something behind the main group. His predatory stance shifted, becoming more alert and interested, like a cat that had spotted a particularly clever mouse. His weapon systems powered up with a high-pitched whining sound. "Wait," he said, tilting his massive head to one side and studying the rear of their formation more carefully. "Is that the one they call Ember?" Every eye in the squad turned toward Hana, who was still crouched behind the fallen log. Her rifle was shaking in her hands, and her face had gone completely white with terror. The other soldiers looked completely confused, wondering how this legendary predator could possibly know about their weakest squad member. Captain Rock lowered his weapon slightly in surprise. "Hunter, there must be some mistake. That is just our human, and she is barely qualified as a soldier. How could you possibly know who she is?" The ancient predator stepped closer, his massive form casting shadows across the forest floor. "Oh, I know exactly who she is," he said, with what sounded almost like respect in his electronic voice. "The question is, do the rest of you have any idea what you have been traveling with all this time?" 3 days passed quietly on the military base, and Hana thought maybe things would get better. The alien soldiers still looked at her strangely, but they had stopped laughing out loud when she walked by. She spent most of her time in the weapons maintenance bay, cleaning rifles and checking equipment, because it was the only place where no one bothered her. The work was simple, and it kept her hands busy so she did not shake as much. Lieutenant Gino Park found her there on the 3rd morning, polishing the same rifle for the 4th time. His face was serious, and Hana could tell something was wrong. He sat down on a supply crate next to her workbench and watched her work for a few minutes before speaking. "Hana," he said quietly, "you need to know something. The base commanders are getting reports from deep space scanners. Something big is coming our way, and it is not friendly." She looked up from the rifle and saw worry in his eyes. Gino had been in the military for 8 years, and she had never seen him look scared before. "What kind of something?" she asked, setting down her cleaning cloth. Her hands started to shake again, just thinking about what could make a veteran soldier look so nervous. She had heard stories about pirates and raiders, but the way Gino was acting made her think this was much worse. Before he could answer, the emergency sirens started wailing throughout the base. The sound was so loud it made Hana cover her ears, and the red lights that flashed made everything look like it was covered in blood. All around the base, soldiers started running toward the main assembly hall, where emergency briefings were held. Commander Thax stood at the front of the packed auditorium, looking out at hundreds of alien faces, from dozens of different species. His golden fur was perfectly groomed as always, but Hana could see tension in the way he held his clawed hands behind his back. The hall was so quiet, she could hear the ventilation systems humming. "We have a situation," he announced, and his voice carried to every corner of the room. "Long-range sensors have detected a ship approaching our sector. It belongs to a void hunter." He paused to let that information sink in, and Hana heard several aliens gasp or make frightened noises in their own languages. "For those who do not know what that means," Commander Thax continued, "void hunters are creatures that travel the galaxy looking for intelligent species to hunt for sport. They are ancient, powerful, and they consider all other life forms to be nothing more than prey animals. They do not negotiate, they do not show mercy, and they do not stop until their hunt is complete." Hana felt her blood turn to ice water in her veins. She had heard whispers about void hunters in the mess hall late at night when soldiers thought no one was listening. The stories always ended the same way, with entire worlds stripped of life and cities turned to glass by weapons beyond imagination. Sergeant Major Crix stood up from his seat. In the front row, his forearms moved nervously, and his compound eyes reflected the red emergency lights like tiny mirrors. "Commander, our defense systems should be able to handle one hunter ship. We have shields, weapons, and trained soldiers." He sounded like he was trying to convince himself as much as anyone else. Commander Thax shook his head grimly. "This is not just any void hunter. The ship belongs to Keth Var, the Render, one of their most successful predators. Intelligence reports show he has destroyed over 50 colonies and claimed more than 10,000 trophies from across the galaxy. His hunting record spans 3 centuries, and no military force has ever successfully fought him off." The room erupted in frightened chatter as aliens talked to each other in worried voices. Some of the younger soldiers looked like they wanted to run away, while the veterans sat in grim silence thinking about what they had gotten themselves into. Hana noticed that even Captain Rock looked concerned, and she had never seen the massive Thexian show fear about anything. "The hunter ship has advanced stealth technology," Commander Thax explained, raising his voice to quiet the crowd. "Our sensors can barely detect it, and by the time we get a clear reading, it will be too late to mount an effective defense. We need to take the fight to them before they can establish a hunting ground on our planet." "Captain." Rock stood up, his rocky form towering over everyone around him. "Commander Delta Squadron Volunteers. For forward reconnaissance, we will locate this void hunter and engage him before he can threaten the base." His deep voice boomed across the auditorium, and several other squad leaders nodded in agreement. "Very well," the commander replied. "But remember what you are facing. Void hunters feed on fear and desperation. They can sense terror from great distances, and they use it to track their prey. Show weakness, and you will not live to regret it." His golden eyes swept across the room, looking at each soldier in turn as the briefing ended, and soldiers rushed to prepare their equipment. Hana sat frozen in her seat. The thought of facing something that hunted for pleasure made her stomach twist into knots. She could barely handle regular training, exercises, and now she was expected to fight against one of the most dangerous predators in the galaxy. Vex walked past her seat with his usual swagger, but even his blue scales looked paler than normal. "You better stay far away from the fighting." "Little human," he said without looking at her. "Things that hunt for sport always go after the weakest prey." First, his 3 yellow eyes glinted with something that might have been concern, but he walked away before she could respond. "Lieutenant Gino." Park appeared at her shoulder as the auditorium emptied. "Hana, you need to know that whatever happens out there, you are stronger than you think," he said quietly. "I have seen your test scores and your tactical knowledge. You understand warfare better than most of these aliens, even if you cannot show it in practice." She looked up at him with confusion. "What do you mean?" she asked. Her voice was barely a whisper, and she had to clear her throat to speak louder. "I can barely hold a rifle without shaking. How am I supposed to fight something that has killed thousands of soldiers? because Gino said with a strange smile, "Sometimes the best warriors are the ones who understand fear the most. They know what they are up against, and they prepare accordingly. While everyone else is acting brave, you will be thinking about how to survive." And survival is what matters most in a real fight, as the base prepared for battle with weapons being distributed and defensive positions being established. None of the soldiers noticed the small transmission that went out into deep space. It was a brief signal lasting only a few seconds, but it carried detailed information about every person on the base, including their names, ranks, and psychological profiles somewhere. In the darkness between stars, Keth Var the Render received that transmission and studied the data with great interest. Most of the aliens looked like standard prey, but one file made him pause and examine it more carefully. It belonged to a small, human female who showed extreme fear responses, but whose background contained some very interesting details. The ancient predator smiled with rows of sharp teeth as he read about the human called Ember. This hunt was going to be more entertaining than he had expected. The hot twin suns beat down on the military training ground of Kepler 442b as alien soldiers from across the galaxy practiced their combat skills. The base was huge, with metal buildings that gleamed under the orange light and training areas that stretched as far as anyone could see, dust kicked up from heavy boots and strange alien feet as different species worked together in their daily drills. Hana Kim stood in the middle of Delta Squadron, trying her best to hold her plasma rifle steady, but her small human hands would not stop shaking. The weapon felt too heavy in her grip, and every time another squad fired their weapons in the distance, she would jump like a scared animal. Her dark hair was tied back in regulation style, but sweat made small strands stick to her forehead. Despite the cooling systems in her uniform, around her, the other members of Delta Squadron were everything she was not. Vex was an Altarian who stood nearly 2 meters tall with bright blue scales that could change colors when he wanted to blend in with his surroundings. His 3 yellow eyes could see things that humans could never imagine, and his long arms ended in clawed hands that could tear through metal like paper. Right now, those 3 eyes were focused on Hana, and they were filled with amusement. Captain Rock was even bigger than Vex, standing almost 3 meters tall with skin that looked like gray stone. His people, the Thexians, were known across the galaxy as some of the toughest warriors anyone had ever seen. His massive hands could crush rocks, and his thick hide could stop most energy weapons from doing any real damage. When he spoke, his voice sounded like rocks falling down a mountain, and right now he was not happy with what he saw. The other squad members were just as impressive. Zix was an ethereal being made of glowing gas that floated above the ground and could pass through solid walls when needed. Hex looked like a giant insect with armor plating that could stop bullets and 4 arms that moved faster than most eyes could follow. Each one of them had been born to be a warrior, while Hana looked like she should be working in an office somewhere. Safe Vex started laughing first, and the sound made Hana flinch even more. His scales shifted to a bright yellow color, which meant he found something very funny. The other Altarians on the base knew that when Vex turned yellow, someone was about to become the target of his jokes. "Look at the little human. Shake," he said loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "She jumps every time someone fires a weapon. How did something so weak even pass basic training?" His 3 eyes never left Hana as he spoke, and other soldiers from different squads started to turn and look at what was happening. Captain Rock shook his massive head, making small pieces of rock fall from his stone-like skin. "The stories about humans being great warriors must be lies," he rumbled in his deep voice. "This one cannot even hold her weapon without trembling like a leaf in the wind. Maybe we should send her to work in the kitchen, where she cannot get anyone killed." More alien soldiers gathered around to watch the show. Hana had become the entertainment for the afternoon, and she could feel dozens of strange eyes watching her every move. Some of the aliens had never seen a human before, and they whispered to each other in languages she did not understand, but she could guess what they were saying from the way they looked at her. The training sergeant was a Naxi named Sith, who looked like a giant snake with arms. His scales were dark green, and his yellow eyes had no eyelids, so he never blinked. When he moved, he did not walk, but slithered across the ground, leaving a trail in the dust. His forked tongue flicked out constantly, tasting the air around him, and right now he could taste Hana fear, like it was something he could eat. "Private Kim," he said as he slithered closer, his voice making a hissing sound with every word. "If you cannot control your fear." Responses: perhaps you should consider requesting a transfer to Supply Division. Combat requires soldiers who can think clearly under pressure, not ones who panic at every loud noise. His tongue flicked out again, and Hana could tell he was disappointed in her. Hana tried to speak, but her voice came out as a whisper that no one could hear. She cleared her throat and tried again. "I am sorry, Sergeant Sith. I will try harder to control my reactions." She knew her words sounded weak and pathetic, but they were all she could manage. Her heart was beating so fast she thought it might explode, and her hands were shaking so badly she had to put her rifle down before she dropped it. The other soldiers laughed harder at her response. Vex's scales turned an even brighter yellow, and he started making exaggerated shaking motions with his body to copy how she looked. The insect-like Hex clicked his mandibles together in what passed for laughter among his people, and even the floating ethereal Zix made a sound like wind chimes that meant amusement. From across the training field, Lieutenant Gino Park watched what was happening to Hana. He was the only other human on the base, and he knew exactly what she was going through. He had faced the same mockery when he first arrived, but protocol meant he could not interfere with another unit's training session. Still, his hands clenched into fists as he watched his fellow human being humiliated. Captain Rock stepped closer to Hana, his massive form blocking out one of the suns and casting her in shadow. "Perhaps the rumors about Earth joining the Galactic Alliance were premature," he said, looking down at her like she was an insect. "If this is the best your species can produce, then maybe humans are not ready to fight alongside real warriors." The crowd of alien soldiers grew larger as word spread that something interesting was happening. Some of them had never seen a human breakdown before, and they wanted to watch. Others were simply bored with their own training and welcomed any distraction. The training ground filled with dozens of different species, all focused on one small, shaking human girl. Hana felt like she might faint from all the attention. Her vision started to blur around the edges, and she could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. The voices of the alien soldiers seemed to come from very far away, even though they were standing right next to her. She had never felt so alone in her entire life. The mockery continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only a few minutes. Finally, Sergeant Sith dismissed the crowd and ordered everyone back to their regular training duties. The alien soldiers walked away, still laughing, and making jokes about the weak human who was afraid of her own shadow. As the sun began to set and the training day came to an end, Hana sat alone on a bench near the equipment storage area. Her rifle lay beside her, forgotten, as she stared out at the strange purple mountains in the distance. The alien landscape looked beautiful, but also dangerous, like everything else on this world. She did not notice the small device hidden in the rocks nearby that had been recording everything that happened. She did not see the tiny red light that showed it was transmitting data across space to something waiting in the darkness between stars, and she certainly did not know that somewhere in the cold void, an ancient predator had just learned her name, and was now very interested in meeting the human they called Ember. The night air grew cold as the twin suns disappeared behind the mountains. Hana finally picked up her rifle and walked slowly back to the barracks, where she would lie awake thinking about how disappointed everyone was in her. She had no idea that her reputation as the weakest soldier on the base was about to be tested in ways she could never imagine. The forest became completely silent except for the gentle sound of alien wind moving through the purple leaves. Even the strange creatures that lived in the trees stopped making noise as if they could sense that something important was happening. HFY. The render continued to approach slowly, his massive form moving with surprising grace through the thick undergrowth. The squad members stepped aside automatically as the ancient predator walked toward their rear position. Their weapons remained ready, but confusion had replaced their combat readiness. None of them could understand why this legendary hunter was interested in their weakest member, instead of the trained warriors standing right in front of him. "You cannot be serious," Captain Rock said, his rocky voice filled with disbelief. "You know our human. She barely passed basic training and jumps at loud noises. How could someone like her possibly be worthy of your attention?" He gestured toward Hana, who remained frozen behind, her fallen log. The void. Hunter stopped just a few meters away from the group, towering over them all like a living mountain of death and destruction. His multiple red eyes never left Hana's face as he studied her with the intensity of a scientist. "Examining a fascinating specimen, barely a soldier," he repeated, and his electronic laughter filled the air around them. "Your ignorance is astounding, little Thexian. Do you not understand what stands among you?" His weapon systems hummed with power, but remained pointed away from the squad members. Vec's scales shifted to nervous yellow patterns as he tried to make sense of the situation. "Hunter, with all respect, there must be some kind of mistake. This human shows fear at everything. She cannot even complete training exercises without trembling like a sick animal." His three eyes darted between the massive predator and Hana, trying to find some connection that made sense. "Fear the void," Hunter said, and there was something almost like admiration in his voice. "Yes, I can smell it radiating from her in waves, but do you know why she fears little Altarian? It is not because she is weak. It is because she understands exactly what she is capable of becoming when that fear stops controlling her sergeant." Major Crix was monitoring the conversation from base command through their comm links. His four arms worked frantically at his control station as he tried to understand what was happening. "All units maintain defensive positions," he ordered. "We need more information about this situation before we can take action." The ancient predator began to circle the group slowly like a shark swimming around wounded prey. "Let me tell you a story," he said, his voice carrying clearly to every squad member. 3 years ago, there was a mining colony called Zerion 7. It was a small settlement with maybe 2,000 people, including families with children. Captain Rock shifted his weight nervously. "What does some mining colony have to do with our human?" he asked, though part of him already suspected the answer was going to change everything. He thought he knew about the galaxy. "My cousin Vorth decided to hunt there." The void. Hunter continued, his multiple eyes gleaming with the memory Vorth was younger than me, but still ancient by your standards and very confident in his abilities. He had claimed over 800 trophies from 50 different worlds. He chose Zerion 7 because it seemed like it would offer little challenge. The squad members listened, in growing horror as they began to understand where this story was heading. Hana remained perfectly still behind her log, but her breathing had become slow and controlled, instead of panicked. Humans were new to the galaxy, then HFY explained. Still circling like a predator, barely 50 years since first contact, and most species considered them to be another prey race. Soft, weak, afraid of violence. Your databases classified them as non-threatening herbivores who had only recently developed space travel. "What happened?" Hex asked, clicking his mandibles nervously, though his four arms remained ready for combat. "What happened to this Vorth?" The void. Hunter stopped moving, and his voice became quieter, more serious. "Vorth landed on Zerion 7 expecting easy hunting. He killed the first few humans he found and claimed their skulls for his collection according to our traditions. But there was a small human child visiting the colony with her family, a girl barely 12 years old. Hana finally spoke. For the first time since the encounter began, I remember that day, she said quietly. Her voice was steady now, instead of shaking. I remember watching him kill my parents. I remember him taking their heads like they were just trophies for his wall. The other squad members turned to stare at her in shock. They had known Hana for months, but she had never mentioned anything about her family or her past. They had assumed she was just another military recruit trying to serve her species. And what did? "You do little human the void?" Hunter asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. What did a 12-year-old child do when faced with a predator that had killed thousands of beings across the galaxy? "I learned what I really am," Hana replied, standing up slowly from behind the fallen log. Her rifle was no longer shaking in her hands, and her dark eyes had become cold and calculating. "I learned that humans are not prey animals. We are the things that prey animals have nightmares about." Vex's scales turned pure white with shock. "That is impossible," he whispered. "Humans are peaceful. They avoid violence. They show mercy to their enemies. The databases all say, your species evolved as gatherers, not hunters. Your databases are wrong," the Void Hunter said with dark amusement. "Humans are persistence hunters. They evolved to chase their prey across entire continents, never stopping, never resting until their target collapsed from exhaustion. They are patient, methodical, and utterly relentless when they decide something needs to die." Captain Rocky features showed the first cracks of real fear. But she shows terror at everything. Even during training exercises, she acts like she is afraid of her own shadow. How can someone so frightened be dangerous to anyone? Because Hana said, stepping out from behind her cover, "I spent 3 years learning to be afraid, learning to control what I become when the fear stops, learning to be weak so that people like you could feel safe." Around me, her tactical awareness had expanded to encompass the entire forest around them. She hunted Vorth through the mining tunnels for 6 days. The Void Hunter continued, his multiple eyes tracking Hana, every movement. Used the colony's industrial equipment, the maintenance shafts, even the waste disposal systems. She turned his own methods against him, made him experience real terror for the first time in his existence. The forest around them seemed to grow even quieter, as if every living thing could sense that a true predator had revealed itself. Hana moved with fluid precision, positioning herself where she could observe every squad member while maintaining cover from multiple angles. When she finally killed him, Kethvar said with something. That might have been pride. She carved his name into his own skull and left it where other hunters would find it. It was a message that said humans were not prey anymore. They were something much more dangerous. The squad members finally understood that they were no longer looking at their frightened teammate. They were looking at something that had spent months studying their weaknesses, their combat patterns, their habits, and their fears. Something that had been cataloging them as potential threats from the very beginning. And now the ancient predator said, looking directly at Hana, the question becomes what happens next. The transformation was not something anyone could see with their eyes, but everyone in the forest could feel it happening. Hana stood in the center of what had been her squad just moments before, but now they seemed like strangers who had never really known her at all. Her breathing became perfectly controlled and her heartbeat slowed to the rhythm of someone completely calm. The trembling in her hands stopped completely as she adjusted her grip on the rifle. The weapon no longer seemed too heavy for her small frame. Instead, it looked like a natural extension of her body, something she had been born to carry. Her dark eyes swept across each squad member, cataloging their positions, their weapons, and their current emotional states. "Tell them?" she said to Kethvar the Render. her voice carrying a quiet authority that made even the massive Void Hunter pause. Tell them what happened to Vorth, the mighty collector of 800 trophies, terror of 16 star systems. Tell them how a 12-year-old human child became his final mistake. The ancient predator shifted slightly in what might have been nervousness, though he had not felt that emotion in over 3 centuries. She stalked him through the mining complex for 6 days, he said, his electronic voice carrying across the silent forest. Used every tool, trick, and weapon she could find against him. Captain Rock took a step backward, his rocky features showing confusion and growing fear. That is impossible. Humans are prey species. They lack the killer instincts necessary for true predation. They show mercy and compassion even to their enemies. His voice sounded less certain than his words. Prey species. The Void, Hunter repeated, and his laughter no longer sounded amused. Your military databases contain serious gaps in information. Little Thexian humans are not prey. They are apex persistence hunters who evolved to chase their targets across continents until exhaustion killed them. Vex scales flickered between different colors as his 3 eyes focused on Hana with new understanding. But she has shown genuine terror at the smallest things, real fear that cannot be faked. She jumps at loud noises and shakes during weapons training. How can someone so frightened be dangerous? Because I know what happens when I stop being afraid. Hana replied, moving with subtle shifts that placed her within optimal striking distance of every squad member. I have spent 3 years learning to control the thing that lives inside every human. The thing that made us the only species on Earth that other predators learned to avoid. The forest wildlife had gone completely silent now, as if every creature for kilometers around could sense that something had changed in the natural order. Every instinct they possessed told them to hide until whatever was happening finished playing out. She dismantled Vorth piece by piece. Kethvar continued watching Hana with professional respect, made him understand that he was not the hunter anymore. But the hunted used his own psychological warfare techniques against him until he begged for a quick death that never came. Lieutenant Gino Park's voice crackled through their comm system from his position several kilometers away. Hana, what is happening over there? Your biometric readings are showing patterns we have never seen before in any species. Your heart rate is dropping. Your stress hormones are disappearing, and your brain activity looks like someone in deep meditation. The readings are accurate, Hana replied without taking her eyes off her former squad mates. I am sorry you all had to see this. I really tried to stay afraid. I tried to be the harmless human you needed me to be, so you could sleep peacefully at night. Her tactical assessment of the situation was complete now. Every squad member suddenly realized they were no longer dealing with their frightened teammate who needed protection. They were facing something that had spent months learning everything about their combat abilities, their psychological weaknesses, their blind spots, and their daily routines. Something that could have eliminated all of them at any time, but chose not to. When humans first reached the stars, the void, Hunter explained, we studied them carefully like we do all new species. We expected them to be like most intelligent life forms, capable fighters when cornered, but generally peaceful and predictable. We were very wrong about that assessment. Hex clicked his mandibles nervously as his forearms moved to defensive positions. How wrong, he asked, though part of him already knew the answer would be terrifying. We discovered that humans had fought a war on their home planet that lasted 6 years and killed over 70 million of their own people. Kethvar said, his multiple eyes reflecting something that might have been respect. They used weapons that could destroy entire cities, and they kept fighting even when their world was burning around them. The squad members began to understand why the Void Hunters had called off their attack when faced with a species that would rather die fighting than surrender. Even the galaxy's most feared predators had decided that discretion was the better part of valor, but the most Frightening thing about humans, the ancient predator continued, is not their willingness to die in battle. It is their ability to become something else entirely when they stop caring about their own survival, when they decide that destroying their enemy is more important than living. Hana smiled for the first time since anyone had known her, but it was not a happy expression. It was the smile of someone who had just solved a very complex problem. "That is what happened on Zarion 7, she said quietly. "When Vorth killed my parents, I stopped caring about staying alive. I only cared about making sure he could never hurt anyone else ever again." The other squad members finally understood that the small, frightened human they had mocked for months was actually the most dangerous thing any of them had ever encountered. She had been holding back, not because she was weak, but because she was too strong for civilized company. And now Captain Rock asked in a voice that had become much quieter, "What happens? Now that we know what you really are?" Hana looked at each of them in turn, and her expression became sad. "Now you go back to base and never speak of what you learned here," she said, "because the galaxy is not ready to know what humans become when we stop pretending to be harmless." Time seemed to stretch like rubber as the standoff continued in the alien forest. Every heartbeat felt like an hour, and every breath sounded as loud as thunder. Hana stood perfectly still at the center of her former squad. No longer the trembling. Human, they had known, but something else entirely. Her eyes held the cold calculation of someone who could see every possible outcome of the next 60 seconds. Keth Var, the render, watched with fascination as the psychological dynamics shifted around him. The Altarian scales flickered between colors of confusion and growing terror, while the massive Thexian had adopted a defensive stance for the first time in his military career. Even the floating ethereal had drifted backward, suddenly aware of how vulnerable its gaseous form would be to the right kind of attack. "She will not hurt you," the Void Hunter said suddenly, and his multiple red eyes reflected what might have been disappointment. "That is both the beauty and the tragedy of what you see before you. She has become the perfect predator, capable of eliminating every one of you in less than 30 seconds, but her human conscience prevents her from acting on those instincts." Captain Rock found his voice first, though it cracked. With uncertainty, "Hana, what are you really?" The question hung in the air like a living thing, demanding an answer that would change everything they thought they knew about humans and their place in the galaxy. "I am what my species becomes when we stop pretending to be civilized," she replied simply. Her tactical assessment was complete now, and she knew exactly how each engagement would play out. Vex would have to be neutralized first, because his enhanced senses made him the primary threat. The ethereal could be dispersed with the right frequency. Burst Hex armor had weak points at the joints that could be exploited. Captain Rock would be the most difficult, but even his stone-like hide had vulnerabilities. The comm system crackled with increasing chatter from base command as other units across the planet reported similar encounters. More void. Hunter ships had emerged from stealth, but something strange was happening. Instead of attacking, they were making contact and opening communication channels. The hunt is called off. Keth Var announced, suddenly powering down his weapon systems completely. "We came to this system seeking worthy prey, but we have discovered something far more valuable." His multiple eyes focused on Hana with what could only be described as professional respect. Vex scales settled into a confused purple pattern called off. "But you said we would provide adequate sport for your hunting party." His three eyes darted between the massive predator and the small human who had somehow changed the entire situation. "Sport requires the possibility of victory for both hunters and prey." The Void Hunter explained as he began to back away slowly. "What we have found here is not a prey species, but fellow predators who have chosen to restrain themselves for the sake of galactic peace. That is worthy of respect, not exploitation." Lieutenant Geno Park voice came through their comm system, clearly now filled with understanding, and something that might have been Pride Command. This is Alpha Company requesting immediate revision of psychological evaluation protocols for all human personnel. We may have been operating under fundamentally incorrect assumptions about our species. Capabilities back at the base, Sergeant Major. Crix was coordinating reports from across the planet as more Void Hunter encounters ended peacefully. His forearms moved frantically across multiple control panels, while his compound eyes processed data streams from dozens of different sources. All units report similar outcomes, he announced over the command frequency. The hunters are withdrawing without engaging in combat. Commander Thax stood in the command center staring at tactical displays that showed Void Hunter ships departing the system as quickly as they had arrived. In 300 years of military service, he had never seen anything like it. Predators that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia were simply leaving because they had found something that impressed them. Keth Var the Render disappeared back into the purple shadows of the alien forest. The squad members found themselves alone with Hana, who was deliberately forcing herself to tremble again. She made her breathing become shallow and panicked while her hands started shaking as she gripped her rifle. The transformation back to frightened human was as complete as her earlier revelation had been. So Captain Rock asked quietly, "What happens now? Do we pretend that none of this ever happened? Do we go back to treating you like the weak link in our squad?" Hana looked at each of them with sad eyes that held depths they were only beginning to understand. "We go back to the base, and you never speak of what you learned here," she said simply. "Because the galaxy is not ready to know what humans really are when we stop being afraid of ourselves." But why? Vex asked, his scales shifting to colors that showed genuine curiosity. Why hide what you are capable of? Why pretend to be weak when you could? Be respected as one of the most dangerous species in known space, because respect built on fear never lasts, Hana replied as they began the long walk back through the alien forest. Because the moment other species start seeing us as threats instead of allies, the galaxy becomes a much more dangerous place for everyone, and because some of us have learned that true strength comes from knowing when not to use your power. The group walked in silence for most of the journey, each lost in their own thoughts about predators and prey, about fear and courage, and about the small human who had chosen to remain weak for the greater good of galactic civilization. They had all learned something important about the nature of strength and the responsibility that came with it. Behind them, hidden in the purple shadows, other eyes watched and learned. The Void Hunters had found something unprecedented in their long history of galactic predation. They had discovered a species powerful enough to challenge them, but wise enough to choose peace instead. A species that understood that true evolution meant learning when not to hunt, as the twin suns began to set over the alien landscape. Painting the sky in shades of orange and red, the last Void Hunter. Ships departed the system carrying with them stories that would be told in the dark spaces between stars for generations to come. Stories about the species called human and the day they chose mercy over mastery. The hunt was over, but the real test was just beginning. Could a species of apex predators truly learn to live in peace with their prey? Or would their true nature eventually surface to reshape the galaxy in ways no one could imagine? Only time would tell whether humans could continue to hide their fangs behind smiles of friendship. Back at the base, life slowly returned to normal, but nothing would ever be quite the same again. The alien soldiers who had witnessed the truth carried that knowledge like a secret burden, while the humans among them continued to play their roles as harmless allies. But everyone knew that beneath the surface, something had fundamentally changed in the balance of power. In the end, the greatest victory was not in battle, but in the choice to walk away from one. The Void Hunters had learned that some prey was too dangerous to hunt, while the humans had proven that their greatest strength lay not in what they could destroy, but in what they chose to protect.